affirmative.
Without ethics, man has no future. This is to say, mankind without them cannot be itself. Ethics determines choices and actions and suggests different priorities. A beautiful rhyme quote by John Berger highlights the complex nature of our argument today. We stand here to advocate for environmental protection because we believe in the future of mankind, because we believe there is an ethical obligation to put the needs of our fellow people and our home above the economy. We affirm environmental protection should be valued as more significant than economic growth. When debating the cost of economic growth at the expense of the environment, we must first define economic growth. Investopedia defines economic growth as an increase in the capacity of an economy to produce goods and services compared from one period of time to another. Economic protection is defined as policies and procedures aimed at conserving the natural resources and preserving the current state of natural environment according to the Business Dictionary. Value, according to Google Dictionary, is defined as the regard that something is held to deserve the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. The pro side affirms the resolution by strongly advocating on behalf of the environmental protection to extend and preserve its environmental state. The resolution fails to acknowledge the determining factor caused by upholding the current system of economic growth over environmental protection. First contention, environmental protection is valuable and fragile. It is impossible to have a global expansion on finite amount of resources. A prosperous economy is useless if civilization reaches a point of environmental depletion. The environment has been treated as if it is indestructible, always giving source. In reality, it is the giving tree that cannot keep on giving. Climate change and its results should not be seen as the problems for the distant future. Its present is haunting and foreshadows a disastrous future that is dissimilar to the current status. Last year, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned the U.S. has less than 12 years to slash emissions and avoid disastrous levels of global warming. Of this, we have two major points under this contention. Pollution can be defined as, the first one, pollution. Pollution can be defined as the introduction of harmful or poisonous materials into the environment. According to Newsweek, the United States is the world's third worst in study on asthma in children because of the polluted air. According to South China Morning Post, China's air quality has risen from PM 2.5 to 5.2% in the first 2 months of this year. Some examples of major forms of pollution can be air pollution, water pollution, and littering. All these forms can lead to major lifelong effects that can be all changed and within just a few changes. Our second one is developing countries suffer from natural disasters. Developing countries and lower-income families are the immediate factor of climate change. According to the World Bank, developing countries suffer far worse than others. Needless to say, the poor suffer disproportionately when disaster strikes. They are more exposed, more vulnerable, and less able to recover. The VOA News discusses how climate change is a major part of natural disasters and how the disaster has more than doubled in the past 15 years. Haiti, Indonesia, and Myanmar are all examples of developing countries that have suffered, and the saddest part is they contribute the least to pollution. Time and time again, we see developing countries falling at the hands of natural disasters. While it seems probable that providing economic aid will achieve equilibrium within developing countries, the issue remains much more complex. There is no justification for allowing the deaths of hundreds, assuming the effects of climate change are reversible and can be counteracted by future technological advances. Our last contention is environmental protection is an achievable goal. An economy based on sustainable resources is not an achievable goal and in no way restrains economic success. In fact, many organizations are actively trying to find environmental and economic success. In Buffalo, local groups organized to keep the closure of fossil fuel plants from harming the local economy. In California, groups pushed from SB 535, which dedicates fundings from the state's caps and trade program in low-income communities disproportionately affected by climate change. In New York, the Climate and Community Protection Act, a law that mandates emission reduction and investments in affected communities, is the product of a multi-year effort retrieved from the New York Times. Practicing sustainable environmental methods does not undercut the environment, but reduces waste on behalf of the company. By mandating the amount of waste let into the environment, companies themselves can reduce their own cost and loss. It is impractical to keep the current economic system when change itself will help reduce costs, but more importantly, can prolong environmental success.
My name is Joel Leach.
I can go. Economic development and just the economy in general is one of the focal points in our U.S. Democracy and in our world. Basically, you can't really do anything if your economic status is not right. And I feel like economic development and economic growth is always the focal point of everything. Our definition from Investopedia is that economic growth is an increase in the capacity of an economy to produce goods and services compared from one period of time to another, traditionally measured in terms of gross domestic profit. And gross domestic profit from the International Monetary Fund means that the profit measures the monetary value of final goods and services, that is, those that are bought by the final user produced in the country in a given period of time. My team, we are negating the fact that prioritizing environmental protection is more important than economic growth. My first contention is that economic growth leads to a higher GDP and a higher standard of living. According to Sharon Bender, the chairperson of the Environmental Engineering Branch of Institution of Engineers, most nations are dependent on loans from international banking institutions and need to export increasing amount of goods in order to pay the interest on their loans. Nations compete for markets for their goods and are concerned that the static economy will fail to provide the motivation for investment, innovation, and increasing productivity necessary to keep the prices of their goods down and the quality up. CBO projects that under current laws and policies, the economy will grow 2.3% this year, but that growth will average just 1.9% a year between now and 2027. According to the USAID, broad-based economic growth is essential to sustainable long-term development. It creates the opportunities for impoverished households' needs and to raise their living standards, provides countries with the resources to expand access to basic services, and most important of all, enables citizens to chart their own prosperous futures. According to the USAID, economic growth can mobilize new investors and private capital to understand sectors and geographics to create productive jobs, new economy, and enhance access to and quality of services, from financial and energy to health and education, giving people access to markets where they can sell their goods and services and play a productive role in their economics. Our second contention states that economic growth allows the government to provide public services and social service programs. According to the USAID, our economic growth programs also help build new markets for the United States by expanding trade and supporting the emergence of middle-class consumers that can buy U.S. goods and services. And we know that stable economies are less vulnerable to crises and terrorist activities and international. According to the USAID, improving infrastructure like roads and bridges, water supply, and electrical grids critical to lifting the limits on the country's growth. Working with private sector companies to spur economic development so that citizens can participate in a vibrant economy that allocates resources wisely. According to Forbes, including public education and public health, as well as cash benefits, suggest that welfare state programs as a whole enhance the productivity of capitalism and spur economic development. According to Harry Stein, Director of Fiscal Policy at the Center of American Progress, many public investments have a broad economic impact by enabling more Americans to participate in the economy and benefit from economic growth, such as when improved roads and transit systems connect workers to new job opportunities. Our third contention, which is our last one, states that economic growth can allow countries to undo what they have done to the environment. According to PERC.org, the more that our technology grows, the more that we are going to be able to replenish them. Poor countries may have to sacrifice now in order to achieve economic growth. However, what they receive in turn is able to give them back everything they lost and more. According to Professor Robert McCormick on PERC.org, higher GDP reduces total net emissions. He also states that economic growth in the U.S. has improved methods of storing water and increased forest coverage through the way that they build homes. according to Professor McCormick on PERC.org, richer and more developed countries help take more carbon out of the air than poorer countries with low economic development. Also, net.
So we'll have our first crossfire now. Anyone can speak.
Y'all said at the very beginning, y'all were talking about how environmental growth is ethical. So are y'all saying that economic growth is unethical?
We are saying that right now the environment needs to be held at higher standards, and that's our most important home to face. So we believe that if nobody's advocating for something like the environment, that's what we should be talking about.
And how are y'all planning on advocating for the environment?
Right now we're going to talk about how the environment hurts people. So I think the big problem right now is like we can't change the economy because the economy is what gives people aid. But I think if we provide like innovation for the environment, people will already be saved.
And you need money for that innovation, correct?
Some innovation.
No.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it. In the definition of economic growth, it states how you take resources and reuse them in ways that are more valuable, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what is more valuable, the quality of life or economic growth and more money?
So y'all talked about the developing countries and how their people, like natural disasters are completely wiping out these developing countries. You need economic growth in order to help the quality of life of those people, to improve their country so that they have more resources in order to protect themselves from that natural disaster.
Also, resources exist to be consumed, and you can responsibly consume resources to the point that you're not depleting the resources. So, you're not supposed to just leave resources to be there. We're using them, and technological advancements help you to find ways to multiply these resources. And to make technological advancements, economic growth has to be involved. So.
Okay, I would argue that right now we're actually not using our resources, like you said, responsibly, because statistics show that we only have about 3% of the Earth's water is fresh water, 3%. Take into account that most of it is frozen. So that means only 0.8% of the planet's water reserves can be tapped for human use. So consider we have 0.8% of our water resources to use for everyone, and statistics show a lot of that is already going down and it's already polluted because like trash, makes its way to the oceans, toxins make its way, companies are spilling their, whatever their resources into the environment.
The same technology is what we can use to create water purification systems that are going to help us purify this water. We're at a point where we can't fix what's already been done. And in order to fix these things, we have to, I'm sorry.
We'll have our second and third speaker.
We need some supplements. It's Jimenez, Jimenez. Okay, so the United States, we need the economy leads to a higher standard of living. But Paul Romer, the 2018 Nobel laureate, states the following, and it's kind of like a lengthy definition metaphor, so just bear with me. A useful metaphor for production in an economy comes from the kitchen. To create valuable final products, we mix inexpensive ingredients together according to a recipe. The cooking one can do is limited by the supplied ingredients, and most cooking in the economy produces undesirable side effects. If economic growth could be achieved only by doing more and more of the same kind of cooking, we would eventually run out of raw materials and suffer from unacceptable levels of pollution and nuisance. Human history teaches us, however, that economic growth springs from better recipes, not just from more cooking. New recipes generally produce fewer unpleasant side effects and generate more economic value per unit of raw material. If we keep our current economic structure, production will continue. I'm not arguing that it's more will be innovation, whatever. But it will remain stagnant and stunted. The current recipe is extremely restrictive and stunted and can only lead to our demise. Our materials are not limited, and yet our recipe is founded on the belief of an inexhaustible environment. As he states in his definition, new recipes generally produce fewer unpleasant side effects and generate more economic value per unit of raw material. So yes, there's a possibility in the far future where economic expansion will improve our quality of life. But with the current status and infrastructure, it's impossible. At the current moment, the economy and the environment are in conflict. The only way we can hope for a better future is by putting the environment above our own need for more. By changing the recipe, we not only create environmental sustainability, but improve product quality. And then it was also about, money being needed for the economy, right? That was the mentioned point. So our current recipe is always calling for more, for a better standard of living doesn't. That's what the economy provides better standard of living. But there will be no more in about 12 years. 12 years. I would argue that at least most of us in 12 years are still on the cusp of adulthood. So take that into consideration when you're arguing for the economy versus the environment. So there is no denying the outcome, only the timeline in which we will feel the devastating effects of global warming and climate change. In 2018, Catherine J. Wu, who holds a PhD in microbiology and immune biology from Harvard, wrote the following. 91 scientists from 40 countries analyzed over 6,000 scientific studies shows that the future is bleaker than we once thought. A 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures will spell widespread disaster. Even if the world manages to shave off the extra 0.5 degrees, we'll still be well on our way to flooded coastlines, intensified droughts, and debilitated industries. A seemingly small 1.5 degrees Celsius bump in temperature would also alter weather worldwide, wreaking havoc on agriculture and natural ecosystems, and cost about $54 trillion in damages. So there will be a shift in the economy. I'm not arguing that. The only question is, are we the victims of change, or are we the leading champions of change? If we put our environment first, even at the expense of our economy, we are prolonging our lives. We are promising our future generations a chance. And you also mentioned about how innovations help, developing countries meet this. So besides the trillions of dollars of damages that I mentioned are laying ahead of us, millions of lives are at stake. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change wrote the following: climate-related hazards affect poor people's lives directly through impacts on livelihoods, reductions in crop yields, or destruction of homes, and indirectly through, for example, increased food prices and food insecurity. So developing countries are the first victims of environmental change. As we continue to grow and grow, they will be at the mercy of our own kindness and innovation. So just keep that in mind. Where's the justification in the kind of argument you're applying? So what you're applying is, let us help you fix a problem we caused. With our own, technology pollution, we caused that essentially. The report also states, quote, poor people in developing countries will feel the impacts of first and worst, and already are because of vulnerable geography and lesser ability to cope with damage from severe weather and rising sea levels. In short, climate change will be awful for everyone, but catastrophic for the poor. But there is hope if we begin to practice sustainable techniques and practice environmental protection. Jonathan Watts at The Guardian states, quote, saving a mere half-degree could make a huge difference in some part of the world. For instance, it could pull corals back from the brink of complete eradication, an inevitable fate with a 2 degrees Celsius rise, and ease the severity of climate-related poverty, food shortages, and water stress.
2 or 3 seconds.
Okay, so you talked about innovations. A lot of these innovations haven't been created yet. So quote, this is from Smithsonian Magazine. Climate scientists warn that these goals probably won't be met without some serious new technological firepower. There's just one problem. We still have to invent and conventionalize some of these tools before we can actually put them into use. So there's still a whole lot of planning.
Are you ready? Okay, so I know that you talked about developing countries being at a disadvantage, but let's think about this really. Developing countries are struggling. I'm from Africa myself, so I know what it's like, and I tell you that anyone there would pick having food and meals over it being polluted. Because if you're able to grow your economy, you're not putting yourself backwards. They can have food and they can also purify water. So I think that it's hypocritical for rich countries to be the ones to set the pedestal for how much we should restrict the economy, because those nations are going backwards economically. According to Otmar Edenhoff, a researcher at the Potsdam Institute, for Africa to reach living standards similar to those in Latin America, the United States would have to reduce its per capita incomes by 80%. This will result in social conflicts that would be severe. Thus, it seems unlikely that there will be a conscious limit to economic growth, just as it's unlikely for universal targets for climate protection to be agreed upon at any time soon. Also, Sharon Bender, who we quoted before, a professor and chairperson at the Environmental Engineering branch, found that economic growth provided increased standards of living for many people in affluent countries, and it will be necessary for it to provide similar benefits for those in poor countries. Another issue that we're not talking about that's more damaging than economic growth is population growth. On both sides, it's a problem. For us, we have to provide more. It affects the supply and demand. So directly, and the more people that exist, the more people that are polluting. So therefore, it's impossible for us to be able to control population. We can try, but we can't control population, and that's a more important issue than this current issue that occurs. Because the more people there are, the more bad things are happening. And if we're fighting for resources, then there's going to be disease, starvation, and war. And without technological advancements or agricultural advancements, we can't prevent this from happening. Like, we need to produce more in order to be able to provide for these people and not put ourselves in conflict. Also, according to open source systems science solutions, 31,000 scientists say that there is no convincing evidence that humans can or will cause catastrophic heating of the environment. There is no convincing evidence that humans release carbon dioxide, methane, or any greenhouse gases in the foreseen future, causing catastrophic heating to the world. So there is substantial scientific evidence that increases the atmospheric carbon dioxide produced. So basically that's really long, but the point is, there's a lot of scientists agree that it's not people that are doing the things, basically. Like, we're not the ones that are causing as much effect to the world. Also, an important thing would be technology, and there's no way, as we said before, to fix the problems that we have existing right now without technology and making energy easier. Relying on fossil fuels only works for so long, so we can work on renewable energy. Also, we found that the United States has primarily done an excellent job moving from a very dirty place in the 1950s to a quite clean place. This was found by Dr. Carlos Dora, the Health Organization's coordinator at the Department of Public Health here in America. Dr. Dora also says that more cities were monitoring pollution levels and air quality had improved over the period in half the cities in wealthy countries and more than a third of the cities in poorer countries. According to Professor Dan Jacob, air quality has continued to improve in the United States, where airborne concentrations of one pollutant, its particular sulfate particles, has decreased by 3%. Sulfur emissions in the U.S. are mainly from coal combustion, and we have decreased those emissions both deliberately and because we've been moving away from coal and towards natural gas. So it shows you that we're actually making these changes right now. Like, the changes towards making the air better are actually occurring, so we're not in as bad a place as we were years ago.
So our second crossfire.
So, I would like, you guys didn't really go into like great detail, so I want to clarify as to what sustainable techniques do you suggest that they use, and how much would they cost?
Okay, so I have a quote from MIT engineer Howard Herzog, and so the best way to remove carbon dioxide from the air is to not release it into the air in the first place, which that's the simplest solution, but obviously it's not the most realistic. So obviously we have what's already been put into the economy, which is like wind power, solar power, which by the way I know that's like a big issue too, is jobs. How are these going to provide and how are they going to add to the economy? Well, solar jobs actually pay the same, roughly the same median salary as fossil fuel jobs. So we're not taking anything away from the economy by putting in economic or sustainable techniques like solar power. and the jobs that those provide.
So you're talking about stopping the carbon from getting into the air, right? So what are we going to do about the carbon that is already there?
That's
How are we
actually
gonna
the question I have for you. You're
fix
talking
that?
about innovation
Mm-hmm.
that you're saying exists or is going to exist.
Right.
What innovations do you have that could possibly reverse the effects of pollution?
We stated using renewable energy because we can't exactly reverse everything, but then we can make low cost solar panels, wind turbines, electric cars, water purification systems, and to do all these things we need technology. Technology equals economic growth. That's just how it works. There's just no way to curb any of these things without the economy growing.
All of that stuff, like the solar, biomass, wind, all of that stuff is actually reducing greenhouse gas as we speak. And like we said, the whole point is that we cannot find these technologies if they're not being funded to be found. So you have to grow the economy and have people people are not going to want to help the economy if they don't have money to take care of themselves, correct? So you have to grow the economy, help these people out, and then fund what we need to save the environment.
I have a question. Do you think that you can put a price on the environment, like how much money you need? Because I feel like that's a problem. That's always a problem with like the country trying to budget. Like, how do we budget this? How do we put in the tax? Every time people say, oh, what are we gonna do? But then they don't say how much. How much do you want us to spend on the environment? Because like they're interrelated. Like, I don't know why people think they're in conflict, because they should work hand in hand. Because you need a clean environment, and you also need a good economy for a country to really work. So in my opinion, like I just don't know what price you want to put on the environment, basically.
Okay. On growth. Sorry.
You say growth?
On growth, yeah. So one, you talked about people are not the problem to pollution. And I would like to say that people are 100% the problem, because if it wasn't for people, there wouldn't be pollution. So that's just the first thing. So in China, the air quality has worsened, and like she had mentioned, and it has gone from 2.5 to 5.2% in the first 2 months of this year. So understandable that we need to work on the economy, but obviously the people that are still in the economy and doing things in the factories are doing things incorrectly and still promoting people to where in China they're having to wear masks because air quality is so bad. And some examples of major forms of pollution are air pollution, water pollution, and littering. An example like Starbucks. Starbucks has made a decision to stop using disposable plastic straws by 2020. They will switch using recyclable strawless lids. Changes like that from Starbucks can lead to many positive effects on the environment, and we all need to start somewhere. What I'm trying to say is companies aren't making the switch. So yes, it would be nice. Yes, it would be nice if everybody can make the switch in solar energy, but that's not happening. So that's what Ixel was saying with the recipe. Let me further explain what the recipe was saying in easier terms. So if you're cooking and you constantly use the same ingredients to make the same food, and it's going to come out the same every time. Which the factories, they're constantly working and doing the same thing, polluting the air so bad that you have to wear masks. So if nothing's going to get better. Understandable economic growth, but nobody's doing it, period. So if you change up the recipe, then that's what cause for better quality of life. First question, kind of to think about, what is the point of economic growth if we're not even going to be here to enjoy it? Everybody's polluting, you see the ocean, everything like that, so food for thought. Also, it is impractical to keep the current economic system when change itself will reduce costs, and more importantly, can prolong environmental success. So you're trying to make money, long story short, you're trying to make money, and you do exactly the same thing, and it's just polluting the environment more. And then countries like Africa, you say, are the first ones to feel the effects on these countries. Like I'll say, it is always the case, and poor and vulnerable countries are the first to suffer and worst hit. Guthrie says, referring to millions of people impacted by cyclone India and Taiwan and Malawi. Category 2 storms killed an estimated 750 people after completing submerging villages across these countries. Such events are becoming more frequent and more severe, and just keep going. The bottom line, according to the Global Carbon Project, it is that after 3 years in which emissions remain largely flat, global levels of carbon dioxide increased by 1.2% in 2017 and are on pace to jump by 2 points this year. This has a lot to do with the economic growth and much faster, less carbon dioxide intensity way of power. Using data collected from across the globe, national economies and natural resources used were closely examined by an international team of scientists using a mathematical model. The results suggest that as long as our economy system remains its current structure and the pollution grows and continues, both high and low income countries will fall to achieve environmental sustainability. The effects of climate change caused by lack of protection have increased in obscurity. Permafrost holds an intense amount of carbon, enough to double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Also, environmental growth continues at the expense of the environment. Economic growth continues at the expense of the environment. Economic environmental sustainability are closely linked in several ways and will become increasingly more so. With that being said, it is possible that organizations benefit, i.e. create economic gains from being focused on economic sustainability. Evidence from the commercial value attached to environmental sustainability suggests that the answer is yes, and can be gauged by looking at the impractical practice of corporate social responsibility reporting. Environmental accounting in the business process, which underpins the commercial value added, offering independent financial capital in conjunction with natural capital. Practicing environmental accounting helps to identify inefficiencies due to excessive waste, discharge, and poor use of inputs within the value chain. I'd like to summarize our points. Real quick. Economic approach is an achievable goal, and
Hi.
Okay, so Caitlin Clark, I'm so sorry. My biggest thing with everything that you're pointing out is you have some really good points. Like, yes, the environment is so important. We are not going to be able to live without fixing the environment, but we need a plan to fix the environment. So what we're saying is that without the economic growth and everything that you see, all the projects, all the studies, everything that the scientists are doing to figure out all of your points that you're giving us, and like the thing with the Celsius, they have to have studies and they have to have money in order to do these studies. So what we're saying is we need to figure out how to fix it. With the companies are not doing, like, switching over, like you said, how Starbucks is switching over and everybody else. Maybe a good thing would be the government putting restrictions on the companies that can make the switches over. Like, when you put in legislation, it'll be easier to tell these companies, now you have to be more green. Now you have to switch over to these methods in order to make everything more green. With the everybody in the third world countries, developing countries, they're not going to want to help the environment, and they cannot help themselves without being helped. So the better standard of living that we have, the easier it's going to be to fund these developing countries and be able to improve the environment. We're going to have to undo the damage on the environment. I think we can all agree that the damage that is done is done. We have to figure out something that is going to improve it. The technology advances that we're already taking is going to help that. So we're going to have more energy that is more efficient and easier on the environment. Relying on fossil fuels for energy only works for so long, but what happens when these resources are gone? Renewable energy provides reliable energy from a variety of sources such as the wind and sun. All it takes is the right technology to harness the energy on a large enough scale to replace traditional energy sources. So that's when we start talking about the solar and the biomass and the wind, the geothermal using the Earth's energy and the Earth's heat to produce energy, hydropower, low-cost solar panels, like y'all said, but we still have, like, we're developing the technologies to do this on a larger scale. They're also extremely expensive. If y'all didn't know that, the solar panels to put on your houses, just to buy them, because of all the technology that is going into it, is extremely expensive. So all these companies are not going to be able to pay for them without growing their economy. Low-cost wind turbines is a great way to produce energy. Low-cost electric cars, so no longer we're using fuel or oil for these cars, but more electric cars to be able to fix that. Low-cost water purification. Y'all talked a lot about pollution, and once again, we have to figure out a way to undo what we have already done. So just going over our points again, we talked about how economic growth leads to a higher level of standard of living, which is going to in turn help people want to help the environment after they help themselves. Economic growth allows the government to provide more public services and social service programs. So they're going to be able, the governments are going to be able to help out their citizens and make everything more efficient and easier on the environment. And also, economic growth can allow countries to undo what they have done to the environment. So again, everything that we've talked about with the like the technology. Also, one more thing to go back on what you said. We found a source that said 31,000 scientists say that people are not the problem anymore. They decided it is better to focus on advancing technology because blaming people and limiting economic growth would harm the environment and welfare of mankind. We are codependent and part of the environment. We give the environment CO2 and gives us oxygen. The better standard of living, public and social services, undoing the damage to the environment, technology improvements in the air quality, pollution, and yes. Okay.
Kenneth Smith.
No, there's no crosswalk.
I would like to firstly say thank you guys for coming out. You guys look phenomenal and great. Welcome together. And I would also like to thank you guys for not skipping. I feel as my group won because we appeal to ethos, logos, and papers. We use our allotted times, resolutions, and gotten all of our points across and validated them. And all in all, humans are a creature of habit. We have a bad habit of protecting our environment. The first speaker, it said he was only talking about the U.S. and the first contention wasn't completed, so that's one of the reasons why I feel like we won. The second speaker, he spoke on Africa, but it's one of the poorest countries, but actually Africa is one of the richest continents in the world and has some of the richest resources in the world. If it's not people that's causing the downfall, then what is? Again, they only spoke on the U.S. The negative team said that environmental protection and growth and economic growth aren't in conflict, but that goes against the resolution and should be redacted from the floor. The third speaker, she made a point that for us saying that companies need to change their production tactics, yet said it affects greenhouse gases and etc. So that is a contradiction, so it should be redacted from the floor. And another question I have is how are we making the money that you guys said that we need to come up with? And then also you guys talked about how environmental protection is affecting the developing countries, But and they say that it's not affecting developing countries. So I feel like as if China, we have some research saying China has bad air pollution and they're wearing masks and their pH has went up. Has went up over the past 2 months, or these first 2 months of this year. Oh yeah, and so I believe this.
Chrissy, go ahead.
During the crossfire, y'all stated that you didn't need money to practice new technologies, solar power, wind power, and low carbon emissions. So without money from economic growth and money, how would you guys make this happen? Because you said yourself that people do not prioritize environmental protection already. Wouldn't that mean that you must prioritize economic development first? The negative side, we did bring three contentions, and our argument was that economic growth leads to higher GDP and higher standards of living, as well as economic growth allows the government to provide public services and social programs. And then the third was that economic growth can allow countries to undo what they have done to the environment. Economic growth also offers a better standard of living, public and social services, undoing damage on the environment, and we also brought up technologies to improve the damage that's been done. Y'all didn't really seem to bring up many things that can be done. You didn't really provide many options to improve the environment outside of the environment.
Very small audience. Who believes the alphas on this round? And then I get it?
Yeah, I don't know.
It was a really close.
Y'all did very good. It was a good debate.
Y'all
That
both
was
had really
great.
good points. The
That was
crossfires
very
were on point.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good
Good job. Good job.
Good debate. Good job.
We're not angry. It was
That was really good. Oh my god.
Good job, y'all.
So, you literally look at like when you
no one's up to watch the video. We're not even.
no one's built it.
I watched so hard now.
Okay, because I don't feel like so like.
No, you're pushing me. That's perfect.
Yeah.
You want to die? Wait, so again? Oh, what you got? It's not accurate. So like.
Oh, this is on the
Well, no. It's like. Will you stop the recording?
Yeah.
Just press the record button. They're not accurate.
Y'all are in?